Bayern Munich footballer Kingsley Coman narrowly avoided catastrophic injury the other day when he suffered this really bad-looking knee hyperextension. The report is now that he's only going to miss a few games, and he came really close here to having a much more serious injury. Welcome back everyone to your #1 source for learning about everything related to sports injuries and sports medicine news. In today's video, I'm going to walk you guys through the footage of what happened here with Kingsley Coman and talk to you about why he's really fortunate that he avoided a much more serious injury. As you can see, my background, everything's a little bit different here. I'm on the road right now traveling, and so this is kind of my mobile studio setup. So different microphone, different kind of layout, things probably sound different, look different, but bear with me as I try to still bring you guys some good educational content. Make sure and go subscribe, turn those notifications on. Also go check out my Twitter page because I provide more kind of information in real time on some of these stories if you want to get more information as it's happening. But for now, let's get started talking about Kingsley Coman's knee injury. You all have probably seen this photo by now showing this severe amount of hyperextension in his knee. Knee flexion is whenever the knee is bent, and extension is when it's straight. So hyperextension means extra extension. We can even draw a line down through his leg here to sort of quantify in terms of degrees the amount of hyperextension that he actually has. Hyperextension injuries can range from being relatively mild with just a bruise in the bone to having severe multi-ligament injury like an ACL, a PCL, and more. The official word we got about Coman, which tells us he really avoided more catastrophic injury, is he's only going to miss potentially 3 games, and he specifically had jarring of the knee, which is kind of code word for a contusion or a bruise within the knee. He had some pulling of one of the hamstring tendons called the biceps femoris, and then he had tearing of his posterior joint capsule. Let me talk you guys through how each of those things happened based on the anatomy of the knee and the pictures and footage of when this occurred. First off, the joint capsule is basically what it sounds like. It's sort of a protective capsule of tissue that kind of lines around the knee, and among different functions helps to provide and produce some of the synovial fluid that kind of lubricates the knee joint. But think of it as basically a lining around the knee. The posterior capsule is the part in the back of the knee. And so if we look at particularly even just the image of when this happened, if you can think of a band or a capsule around this back of the knee, as it hyperextends, it simply just stretches and tears. Next up, the hamstring. So when you heard biceps, you might have thought biceps in the arm. And we actually have 3 hamstring muscles, and one of them is called the biceps femoris. Femoris, of course, after femur. There's a short head and a long head of the biceps femoris, and these are the hamstring muscles that run more on the outside of the knee and come down and insert on the fibula bone. But again, these hamstring tendons are on the back side of the knee. So whenever we apply that extreme amount of hyperextension, we're stretching all of those structures on the back of the knee, including those hamstring tendons, and this is what caused them to pull. The next part, the bone contusion or the jarring, is simply because as you hyperextend, you basically pinch and smash the front part of the knee joint, the tibia and the femur, onto each other with more severity based on the amount of hyperextension. This causes basically bruising and some bleeding within the bone that, when we look at on an MRI, shows up as this really bright area here in the front of these bones. But as I alluded to in the beginning of the video, Coman is very fortunate to have avoided an ACL tear. In the sequence of what can happen when someone has a knee hyperextension, usually an ACL tear occurs before a PCL tear. If we first look from the back view of when this occurred, we have to look at his alignment of the leg whenever the hyperextension occurred. His leg is kind of bowed outward. We would call this a varus knee position, as opposed to valgus when the knee falls inward. The ACL is typically more predisposed to getting torn whenever the knee is in that valgus position or has fallen inward. So when the knee is bent out like this, there's not as much load theoretically on the ACL. Also, his foot is relatively straight in alignment with the rest of his leg, so there's minimal what we call internal or external rotation of his knee. The more internal or external rotation you have, again, the more stress you put on your ACL. So the fact that he's in sort of a straight position from his foot to his knee without it being pointed in or pointed out tells me more that that is part of what set him up to not have the ACL tear. If his knee would have collapsed sort of inward whenever it hyperextended, he probably would have torn his ACL. Similarly, if his foot would have been really far pointed one way or the other when his knee hyperextended, again, he probably would have involved the ACL. Another thing too, based on some research where they took cadaver models and basically hyperextended the knees and looked at what injury patterns developed, they found around 30 degrees of hyperextension was sort of the critical spot here where we started to see a lot of damage. Coman is extremely fortunate to have avoided more serious damage here to structures like his ACL and his PCL. The other thing you might hear about with this type of an injury is posterior lateral corner damage. That's probably the most common thing we see when someone has a knee hyperextension, and it's referring to a group of structures in the posterior, meaning the back, and the lateral, meaning outside, portion of the knee joint. There's a muscle called the popliteus that runs in this area. You have your LCL ligament, and you have some other small ligaments that provide a lot of structural support to the stability of the knee in this location. Remember, it's on the back and it's on the outside. So if we go again to our view here of when this occurred, this is the area here on the picture of where that posterolateral corner is. And so all of these structures are not only getting bent because of the knee hyperextending, but they're getting bent because of this bowed out position where they're all just pulling away from one another. Unless we suddenly hear something new about a different diagnosis or a new injury they found, the timeline seems pretty reasonable. These are fluke types of things that we see happen in a lot of sports, and as I said, Coman is extremely fortunate that his knee didn't go just kind of one way or the other to cause something more career-threatening like an ACL tear. Thank you as always for watching, everybody. I hope you didn't mind the kind of different sound, the different background. Sorry for any echoes, noise, things like that. We'll be back to the regular studio setup as soon as I'm home here. But as always, thanks for watching. Let me know any questions or comments you have below. And until next time, we'll see you later.